Well, good morning again. I had a veterinary client this past week with what's going on in Ukraine, um, ask me what I thought about it personally, and then also how do Buddhists generally feel about something like this. And so I talked with them for a few minutes, and so I just want to offer up a few thoughts. I'm not going to give you the ultimate answer because it kind of is an individual process for each of us. But I want to give you a few things to think about and consider when you think about war and violence. When my first wife and I, when we decided we could finally afford to buy a house, we were living in poor housing in Rochester. There was some poor housing in Rochester, some apartments, and we decided to buy a home in Troy. So we looked and we found at the corner of 16 and John R. I don't know if any of you know where Telly's nursery is. Sorry to bring up someone else there, but Telly's garden place and nursery and whatnot. Well, the subdivision is right across John R. from there. And there were two models that were up, and there was another model that was being constructed. So we thought, let's go in there. It looks like maybe it's something we can afford. It's a little bit south of Troy, not so far north. And so we talked with the salesman. Chuck was the salesman. I still remember him. If he wasn't selling houses, you'd swear that he was a used car salesman. He had a mustache. He had hair that he slicked back, smoked a cigarette, but he was a friendly guy. He was really a friendly guy. And so he said, drive around and look, he said, we got a few houses being constructed. He said, we only have one house fully constructed with someone living in it. He said, it's way in the back lot there because they wanted to, the next street over called Orpington, they have really extensive long lots. And so there won't be anything built behind those houses at all. I thought, boy, that sounds kind of cool. So anyhow, we drove over there and, geez, what about this lot on the right of them? We'll pick that. And we went back and talked with Chuck, and we said, who are these folks, by the way? And he said, they're both teachers. We go, wow, this is cool. My wife was a teacher. So yeah, let's do it. So we did the deal. And when we finally moved in there, we got to know our neighbors really, really well. We lived next to each other for, 17 years before I moved out. And his name was Gary also. And they're a really interesting couple because he came from a small little town called Calava. Calava is southwest of Traverse City. It's just above Brethren, the town of Brethren. These are towns that have like 300 to 350 people in them. And his family were strawberry farmers. And they were hard workers. They didn't make a whole lot of money, but they loved what they do. They loved working with the land. And they're members of Church of the Brethren, also known as German Baptists, one of the historic peace churches. The other two historic peace churches are Mennonites and various groups of Mennonites and Quakers. His wife was about as opposite of that as you could believe. She came from one of the Grosse Points. She dressed really very nicely and wasn't afraid to let it be known that she came from one of the Grosse Points and aspired to more than they were going to have in Troy there, and came from a big Roman Catholic family and church. So really extreme opposites here. Big institutional church and just a little puddly building, in Calava, where Gary was baptized in the river, baptized 3 times forward. Bonnie was baptized as an adult. Bonnie was baptized as a little baby, sprinkling on the forehead. So Gary and I, my wife and I used to hang out with teachers. Let's start it like that. And when I was in veterinary college, teachers are good people to party with. They really like to have fun. And so we used to have a lot of fun, the four of us together. But ultimately, the night would end up with Gary and I sitting out on his deck or our patio, and he was a good beer drinker, as was I. So, after 4, 5, 6 beers, we'd have all the world's problems solved. We knew what was wrong with the world, and we had it solved. One of the things that we used to focus on a lot, because he was really fascinated by religion too, as was I. And we talked a lot about religion, about churches, about growing up in a peace church, about being baptized in a river versus a little baptismal font. And we talked about war, because this is the time right after Vietnam was just, had come to an end. And he didn't get drafted. It had to do with a health issue rather than him declaring, pacifism. But we talked about what would have happened if, we would have been drafted. I don't know how many of you have seen, what's it called? What's the Ridge, the movie with Desmond Doss? Hacksaw Ridge. Hacksaw Ridge. True story. World War II, of Desmond Doss, who was a Seventh-day Adventist. And Seventh-day Adventists are kind of like partial pacifists. You can choose pacifism if you want to, but you don't have to. Whereas the historic peace churches, they generally always choose pacifism. So Gary and I used to talk about that a lot. And one of the things that we talked about was the 5th commandment, thou shalt not kill. Versus I was already interested in Buddhism, so we used to talk about, Buddhism, there are no thou shalts. There are, consider doing it like this. But there's no one out there that's going to punish you. The only thing that's going to punish you is the fruit of your karma. That's going to punish you. In other words, yourself is going to punish yourself. And we used to talk about, what does that word kill mean? And interestingly enough, in the Hebrew language, the word kill that's been translated kill, thou shalt not kill, actually implies murder. It doesn't mean just general killing. It means someone has envy or jealousy or anger or hate in their heart, and the intention is purposeful to get rid of that person because of this hate. Whereas the Buddhist concept of killing is a little bit more general, more inclusive. Thou will not kill or consider not killing any sentient being, anything that has feelings. That includes a whole lot more. Possibly even, if we get as crazy as we can, possibly even trees, plants. There's research that shows that they have feelings. So it's something to consider when you think about, wars. You've heard of the just war theory. This was kind of a Christian philosophical concept that was developed, although it applies to any and all of us. The just war theory is that, how do you reconcile all of these various things, that people are being killed and who didn't ask to be killed in a war? Is there a just war that's possible? And 3 things that they try and reconcile in the just war theory. Number 1, the taking of life, the fact that it is wrong. Okay? And then you try and reconcile that with the fact that states or countries, they've got a duty to defend their citizens. That's one of the things that they offer to their citizens. And then thirdly, protecting innocent human life and defending important moral values sometimes requires that we use force and violence. Not that we want to, but that may be the only thing that can overcome what's going on. So we Buddhists tend to live by principles, suggestions for what we might do, ways that we might behave that motivate us to cultivate certain values. They're not commandments. Venerable K. Sri Dhammananda, who one of his many books. This one happens to be What Buddhists Believe. I don't know if this is in our. Okay, we've got it in our. It's really a good read. Just a lot of questions there. Hey, what about this? What about that? What about the other thing? And he is really. He just died in early 2000s. He was a Theravadan monk and scholar, and has his doctorate, and started the Buddhist Missionary Society. And if you ever look it up, Google it, you'll find that you can get a lot of literature, a lot of different books, the Dhammapada, a host of books, usually in Theravada Buddhism, for free. They'll send them to you. You just got to contact them. So he wrote this particular book, and one of the things he says in there is, quote, "A Buddhist should not be the aggressor, even in protecting his religion or anything else. He must try his best to avoid any kind of violent act. However," underline, however, "the Buddha did not teach his followers to surrender to any form of evil power, be it mankind or supernatural." Interesting, huh? So I want to read you something further, and this is a little bit of this comes from the Nikayas, and Dr. Dhammananda, would you put your hands in Hapchong for this, please, because he does quote this from the Nikayas, the words of the Buddha. "One day Sinha, the general of the army, went to the Buddha and said, 'I am a soldier, O Blessed One. I am appointed by the king to enforce his laws and to wage his wars. The Buddha teaches infinite love, kindness, compassion for all sufferers. Does the Buddha permit the punishment of the criminal? And also, does the Buddha declare that it is wrong to go to war for the protection of our homes, our wives, our children, our property? Does the Buddha teach the doctrine of complete self-surrender? Should I suffer the evildoer to do what he pleases and yield submissively to him who threatens to take by violence what is my own? Does the Buddha maintain that all strife, including warfare waged for a righteous cause, is forbidden?' The Buddha replied, 'He who deserves punishment must be punished, and he who is worthy of favor must be favored. Do not do injury to any living being, but be just, filled with love, with kindness. These injunctions are not contradictory, because the person who is punished for his crimes will suffer his injury not through the ill will of the judge, but through the evil act itself. His own acts have brought upon him the injury that the executors of the law inflict. When a magistrate punishes, he must not harbor hatred in his heart. When a murderer is put to death, he should realize that his punishment is the result of his own act. With this understanding, he will no longer lament his fate, but console his mind." The Blessed One continued, "The Buddha teaches that all warfare in which man tries to slay his brothers is lamentable. But he does not teach that those who are involved in war to maintain peace and order, after having exhausted all means to avoid conflict, are blameworthy. Struggle must exist, for all life is a struggle of some kind. But make certain you do not struggle in the interest of self against truth and justice. He who struggles out of self-interest to make himself great or powerful or rich or famous will have no reward. But he who struggles for peace and truth will have great reward. Even his defeat will be deemed a victory. If a person goes to battle with a righteous cause, then Sinha, he must be prepared to be slain by his enemies, because death is the destiny of warriors. And should his fate overtake him, he has no reason to complain. But if he's victorious, His success may be deemed great, but no matter how great it is, the wheel of fortune may turn again and bring his life down into the dust. However, if he moderates himself and extinguishes all hatred in his heart, if he lifts his downtrodden adversary up and says to him, "Come now, make peace and let us be brothers," then he will gain a victory that is not a transient success, for the fruits of that victory will remain forever. End of the quote. In our America-Europe parish of our Tego order, right now we have 4 clergy who are serving in the United States Army. We have one in Korea at Camp Humphreys. We have one in Hawaii. We have one at Fort Bliss in Texas. And we have another chaplain, a Tego chaplain, at Fort Benning in Georgia. The Captain Anake in Fort Benning in Georgia, every week he gets at least 300 soldiers who are part of his Sunday morning worship. 300. It's amazing, just amazing how people are responding to the Buddha Dharma in the service. A Air Force Academy chaplain said, and I quote, "The questions of Buddhism are the questions of life and death. So, where else would you want Buddhism than right there where those questions are the most vivid?" Makes sense, doesn't it? This was at a time when the Air Force Academy was deciding whether or not they wanted a Buddhist chaplain a number of years ago. And they finally decided and gave that chaplain a little space in one of the basements there. And since that time, their Buddhist services have grown also, as have they across the services. The Dhammapada, chapter 14, called the Buddha. Avoid evil, do good, cultivate the mind. Remember, it's our intention, it's the mindset that we hold that decides whether the action that we do is not necessarily right or wrong, but is skillful, kusala, or non-skillful, akusala. Thank you.